Hello, and welcome to the Redline Solutions webinar. I'd like to give a big thank you for everybody joining us on YouTube today. Our session is the evolution in the supply chain, and we're very pleased to have Bruce Stubbs, the Director of Supply Chain Marketing at Honeywell, taking us through this topic. Bruce has 25 years experience in the field, so plans to be a great session. A little bit about Redline before we start. Redline was established in 1997 with headquarters in Santa Clara, California. We are a leading system integrator with extensive knowledge in barcode, voice, vision, RFID, data capture and identification systems. We work closely with our clients to develop the most suitable, cost-effective solution for their needs and have a variety of support options to keep those systems running smoothly. We specialize in warehouse management, inventory control, asset tracking, healthcare, and product labeling systems. Our in-house development team have created a suite of SaaS and server-based systems for inventory and traceability, implemented across the US and Canada, and we work with many customers from Fortune 500 to startups. Though we do partner with many vendors, we're very proud to be a Honeywell Platinum Performance Partner, and we thank them for their help in their presentation that we're giving today. So, about the agenda, what's driving change, current trends in the industry, what are your peers saying, and then we'll cover specific solutions. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to Bruce.
Well, thank you, Adrian. I think that everybody would agree that the supply chain is certainly evolving and evolving at a much faster rate than it ever has in the past, and I think that's going to certainly continue. And there's certainly driving that. One of those is us as consumers. So, you know, we've really transformed the internet from being a mechanism to provide us with immediate access to data and knowledge and information to a mechanism to provide us with immediate access to goods and services. How much so? Well, in 2014, the broadband mobile subscriptions outpaced the global population. Probably everybody on the phone has at least 2 to 3 broadband subscriptions. You know, most of us have a different one for work, one for personal, the other subscriptions we subscribe to. And really what that's done is, as you see by the graph, 98% of the respondents made online purchases in the last several months. And as we enter this peak holiday season, it's probably going to be closer to 100%. And that is driving a lot of what's happening. If you could hit the advance real quick, please, Adrian. And that's with the LATAM and APAC internet still developing. So while broadband, or I should say the e-commerce phenomena is growing at approximately 20% a year, once the internet is completely rolled out in LATAM and APAC, where literally more than half of the world's population sits, that will spike that growth even higher than 20%. So if any of you on the line are providing fulfillment services in an international manner, then your customer base is going to considerably grow over the next several years. Another driver is a demographic driver. We've seen, you know, several decades ago there was a movement from people from the cities out to the suburbs. Well, that's now in reverse. So we have mass urbanization on the rise, which means people are moving back to these heavily populated and denser population centers in the cities. That is also providing a sort of a challenge, let's say, for the e-commerce industry. It's the old models for distribution and fulfillment were based on the old model of demographic, where we had a lot of regional distribution centers set up, and those were able to distribute or fulfill to a radius, and then once the radius grew or the population grew, then another regional DC would be put up. That model is slowly dying a death right now because of the urbanization. So it's not efficient to be able to move the product, especially product in a very fast manner when you think of e-commerce and the next day type delivery that sometimes is demanded in that model. So what DCs or what our end users that we're talking to are looking to do are to move hub DCs closer to these population centers and let the regional DCs fulfill the hubs, and then locate inventory, especially high value SKUs and high volume SKUs near those population centers. There's also a technology driver, and it's really a reverse polarity of innovation. Years ago, large innovative companies, industrial companies like Honeywell, really did a lot of the innovation and pushed that out to the industry, and as well the consumer technology organizations were able to take advantage of that. What's happening now is because of the fast growth of consumer technology, it's a reverse polarity. We are now able to take advantage of what's being developed for the consumer because that's being developed in a much quicker fashion. And in this case, voice of customer feedback is going to be vital to our innovation success moving forward. So we rely on people like Redline, who has intimate relationships with their customer base to be able to provide us the type of feedback we need so that we are not innovating in a vacuum, but rather innovating according to need of what's needed by the customer base. So your input back to Honeywell and back to Redline is very important to us to be able to drive the type of innovation that you need. The other thing that's going to be important is collaboration. In order to make the whole supply chain work in the fashion that we are, in the manner that it is right now, with the immediacy, is there used to be silos. So you could check its boxes. If I picked the order right, I picked the right quantity, the right item, and I did it damage-free, I could check off my KPIs, and the next step in the line was delivery, and whether they did it correct or not, it didn't matter. My check boxes were made, but it's really not that way anymore. What's happening is that the end customer experience is the thing that's most important, and in order to be able to do that, all these silos of supplier, distribution or fulfillment center, and delivery need tipped on their side in order to form, one conduit, so to speak, that provides that visibility in the supply chain network from supplier to DC to store level or consumer level. And the old demand-driven supply network, which 15 years or so ago had a lot of momentum, there's a new focus coming around to that, because in order to be able to fulfill in the time frames necessary with the increased velocities, we need to be able to have, as well as increased sales revenue and customer satisfaction without having to push a lot of inventory, which is capital, right? It's capital money out into areas. We need better information. We need true demand information. And that can only come through the collaboration and the business analytics that are supported by real-time data capture. And as I mentioned, it's no longer customer service. It's really the customer experience. The customer now determines the how, when, and way they want items shipped, and there's no longer a focus just on the delivery driver. It's really on the entire channel to make that happen. So from supplier, being able to have visibility in transit to the goods so that I can make good decisions. And we talked a little bit about those hub DCs or 3PLs. It's really more now driven by the consumer experience than it is consumer service or customer service. So that really forces some ramifications really on the DC. It's stretching the supply network. The DC throughputs are rising faster than I've ever seen them. I started in the business about 33 years ago in the distribution arena, and I've never seen throughputs like they are now. And it's not just the amount of product coming through, but it's the velocity of the product as well. So more product is coming through faster, which is really stretching the capabilities of the DC to handle this volume. If you couple that with SKU proliferation, the consumers want more variety. So now I've got more SKUs coming through faster in higher volumes. It's stretching the capability of the DC to be able to handle this, especially if they're trying to do that with the same amount of space and the same amount of personnel. Which really presents some challenges. There's certainly different model now with fulfilling orders, both to stores and direct to consumer, as they can come from the DC, they can come from the store, they can come from the supplier itself, and they can go to the stores or to the DC. So there's a lot of little lines that can be connected there. The other challenge really though, and I think this is the bigger challenge, is that each picks are more costly to fulfill. So if you're picking pallets to send to your stores, whether those be full pallets or mixed pallets of cases, you're still getting a lot of hit density as you go through your pick operation. With eaches, you could be traveling further distances for less items, which decreases your hit density on the pick slots, and hence that becomes more costly to fulfill. Couple that with some of the the infrastructure issues where DCs had typically been set up to fulfill to stores. So there's the issue can be the facility itself, whether it's laid out or set up correctly, the systems that are in place to be able to handle the inventory. Can it handle multiple inventory buckets to be able to do store fulfillment and each fulfillment to a direct-to-consumer? And then even the expertise on how to handle those products. So there's a few organizations, very, very few, that have mastered the ability to do both store fulfillment and direct-to-consumer fulfillment out of the same facility. Some have gone to the model where they have separate DCs for that. So I've got a store fulfillment DC, which is a more regional-based model, and then I've got direct-to-consumer DCs, which may be strategically placed near, population centers or where I see those orders being fulfilled too. But some have decided that they don't have any of that in place. They don't want to set up the new facilities, put in systems and so forth. So 33% of them are actually hiring 3PLs to do their direct-to-consumer business. So if you are in the 3PL business, this is good news for you. There's a lot of people out there that are joining the direct-to-consumer fulfillment space that are going to be looking for people to be able to fulfill those needs for them. One of the other challenges, and one of the ways the challenges are being met, is through automation and robotics. For instance, mechanized picking doubled from 8% to 16% globally from 2013 to 2015. And the thing about that, though, is it's usually in areas that are where it's regulatory driven or compliance driven. So while in the North American region, it's not so prevalent right now, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And that is really being dictated by the type of business and the volumes. There's a shortage of labor force for the DCs. It's very hard to hire and retain people. So some people are going down the automation and robotics path. Now the thing about that is it's really high initial cost and some very long ROI periods. We have some clients in Spain, retailers in Spain, that have decided to go all automation and robotics, and the initial cost is in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars with 15 to 17 year paybacks. So that is being driven specifically by labor issues. We don't have some of that yet here in North America, but it is happening in Quebec province in Canada. So it is becoming, like I said, more prevalent, but it's something to be aware of. And it's something that as you make that decision, just keep in mind that there's ways to drive efficiencies that are lower initial cost and certainly shorter ROI periods that you can be able to help handle these extra volumes without going down this path. There's also, if we think of the supply chain, it's not just the DC fulfillment aspect, it's the delivery process as well, and there's a lot of ramifications for transportation and logistics in addition, and certainly with the peak season, straining the capacity, missed delivery windows can certainly impact customer loyalty, and that may not even be the fault of the fulfillment center. So if the fulfillment center could lose business because the transportation element didn't make the delivery on time. That's why that collaboration that we mentioned earlier is so important. And we talked about the shortage in the DC. There's also a driver shortage, and it's well over 100,000 right now in North America alone. There's companies, not just long haul and LTL, but even the parcel courier industry is looking to try to find qualified drivers, and they're having a very difficult time doing that. And that's all adding to the problem, or I should say the opportunity, because the volumes are growing and the availability of staff is still not growing at the same pace. So this is really pushing the limits on what we're trying to do from a fulfillment. In fact, some survey that we did, some survey results show that the new reality for T&L, fastest isn't the key. There was a couple years ago, there was a big push toward same-day delivery, and there was a lot of press around that and so forth. But it was less than 1% of the people that we talked to actually wanted or demanded same-day delivery. When they started clicking that little drop-down box, and it showed that 2 to 3 day was one cost, next day was one cost, and same day was another. The sticker shock set in. And there's certainly items like RX or some critical items. If I'm a manufacturer or something and I need a part, something along those lines, where same day can still be viable. But the average consumer really isn't pushing as much as we are led to believe for same day. And if you look at the metrics, if we take the North American population as it is right now, and let's use the U.S. demographic as an example, where people are actually located right now according to the last census, if I were to do second day delivery, I could hit 91% of the population with 3 DCs if I was setting up a fulfillment center using a planning network tool. I could do next day and hit 66% of the population. So a little bit of a drop there, significant drop, but it would only be 4 DCs. Same day, I could only hit half of the population, and I would have to have 30 DCs to do that. So when we talk about there's a cost of doing business, that's what the realization of the cost of same-day metrics. So what people really are looking for when we spoke to them is more accurate delivery windows, not accuracy on actually what is shipped to them. That's a responsibility of the fulfillment center, but accuracy on the delivery window. And you can see that 2/3 of the customers want something between the 1 and 3 hour range. So T&L companies are responding to this. There's some doing the weekend deliveries now. There's some doing evening deliveries. There may be in the future some people doing split shifts, doing 6 a to 2 p.m. and 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. based on, the needs in certain geographic areas. But instead of trying to do same day, they want more accurate delivery windows, and this is one of the ways that the T&L organizations that we've been talking to are looking to accomplish that. Which really, the new era in fulfillment, and this is something that's been going on now, and it's going to continue to increase, is really order from anywhere, fulfill from anywhere. And that includes not just delivery to home, to office, to store, to pick up store in store, but also to drop boxes and things like that, especially in highly populated areas where deliveries can be made and people can pick it up at their convenience, which in order to accomplish this, in order to make sure that that the items are picked up at a specific time and delivered at a specific time and delivered to the location or the right drop box in a bank of boxes and so forth, is not going to be able to be fulfilled on paper. It's going to take data collection and scanning and mobile computing and printing to be able to accomplish this in the manner it needs to be done. And then if you look at the big picture components of the supply chain, there's a lot of people that say that if 100% service level is great, but that comes with a cost. So if you look at service versus cost, the elements of service are certainly fill rate and lead time. So in order to decrease those lead times that consumers are demanding, I need to have a lot of inventory on hand. And if I wanted 100% fill rate, that might mean too much inventory on hand. And certainly to be able to accomplish that, there's a cost involved. Do I have too much inventory? Too much safety stock? And what are my transportation and my DC costs? So it's a balancing act of cost and service. Typically people shoot for that 98 to 98.5, sometimes 99% service level, and then try to balance that with the cost. And focusing on certainly on one maybe causes a loss of opportunity in another. And if you think of parallel lines, as my service line increases on a graph, my cost line should increase parallel to that. And that's great, but ideally we'd like to increase service with lower cost. And the only way to do that, to increase that service line on an upward trend and keep the cost line flat to increase that revenue delta, is really to use data capture and technologies that would allow me to increase the service and actually not just increase costs, but keep them flat or even lower them. The good news is, though, is the change management is much easier. When I started in this business over 30 years ago, everything was on paper. And getting people to move from paper to data collection type technologies was extremely difficult. As the time wore on, it became somewhat easier, but it's still, it was not easy. It was still a challenge in a lot of situations. Now, most of the DCs that I walk into have a much younger workforce. The younger workforce is much more tech savvy. They've grown up with technology. Most of the people that are entering the workforce now have never been without it. So they actually expect to be able to work off of technology. In fact, they would like to work off their own devices, which there's a lot of reasons in an industrial environment not to allow that, not just from a safety standpoint and a focus standpoint, being able to keep them on task, but also the userability of the device itself in that environment. But the good news is that if you have been thinking about introducing new technologies into your environment, now's a good time to do it. So we did some surveys, and I'll have Adrian tap two or three more times, and we'll just bring these up to fill the page. One of the other things we talked about when we talked to the managers that we spoke to was in the past 6 months, and these are fulfillment center managers, so these are VPs of distribution, directors of distribution, logistics, and so on, that 8 out of 10, literally 80% of your peers have said that they've been tasked by their C-level executives to find savings in their operations. That's good, because that means that the people are keeping their finger on the pulse of the supply chain and understanding that in the economies we work under now, it's not so easy to grow the bottom line P&L of an organization with increased revenues all the time, if we need to remain competitive, but sometimes we can grow that bottom line P&L just as easily by reducing cost out of the cost centers, and certainly the DCs are cost centers, not profit centers. And on average, they've been tasked with finding 20% savings. Now that's not insignificant. That's very significant. So, that's not going to come easily, but it can be done by, especially looking at processes and workflows that are in the DC that are the most inefficient. And sometimes that happens to be around the picking workflows. The more disturbing news that we saw was that 16% of the managers that we interviewed said they were not even going to review their processes until they started receiving customer complaints. And that's a very reactive mode. It's a way to lose customer loyalty before you actually take action, and we certainly don't recommend that. We recommend that people are on a continuous improvement path to look at their processes and understand where they may have efficiencies and where technology and process improvement can help those. And one of the biggest ways to improve processes is to eliminate paper. One of the more disturbing numbers that we got back from our survey was that 23%, and this survey was done across North America and Western Europe in very mature fulfillment environments, that 23% were still using paper, and it was actually highest in the US at 27%. Now, that doesn't mean that they were using paper in all their workflows, but that meant that the way we asked the question, there were significant workflows using paper, which is quite honestly the most inefficient way to handle any workflow process in the DC is on paper from an accuracy and a productivity standpoint. The other thing we saw was that 2/3 of the DCs that we interviewed were actually currently supporting some form of omni-channel distribution. That's not surprising with the growth of online e-commerce, and it's like I said, we're growing at around 20% a year, and will continue to grow even faster once the internet's completely rolled out. So, but that's significant. That's a lot higher number than 5 years ago. And so when we took some additional or some prior survey numbers, and that number was below 25% at the time. So you can see the type of growth that's experienced. And then on average, 84% of the decision makers we spoke to. Now, there's 3 different decision makers we spoke to in the fulfillment environment. We spoke to would be the operational decision maker, which is the person, the VP of distribution, director of distribution, the person actually in charge of the operation. We also spoke to the IT decision maker, and we also spoke to sometimes the economic decision maker. But in this case, just from an IT standpoint, 84% of them said that data capture would make a positive impact on their omni-channel strategy. And then we spoke to T&L as well. We did some survey in T&L, and as you can see, looking at where they want to invest their money going forward to drive efficiencies is really around technology. So it's not trying to add more trucks and more personnel. That is a very expensive way to handle the increase in volumes. Now, sometimes that's a necessity. I have to add more routes, which means adding trucks and personnel, but most of the people in T&L we talked to trying to get more out of what they already have from a fixed asset standpoint. So they're trying to add the systems, as you can see here, where they can do business intelligence and the applications, route planning and dispatching, as well as the right devices to make the staff and the routes they currently have more efficient. And if they do that, they can try to, or should be able to, and will be able to, drive more per route and make each route have more deliveries and make each route more productive. And even though they may have to add fixed assets, they're trying to keep that number lower. So when we think of the Internet of Things, big buzzword, right? Everybody's been talking about the Internet of Things, and as you can see by this, some of the growth companies are actually more advanced right now than the mature companies. from an Internet of Things standpoint. And one of the things that people think about is it really a competitive advantage? Does it matter? I'll give you an example where, and literally 50% of the people that we surveyed said that it would matter in their operations. The Internet of Things could provide efficiencies, and 50% said no. Here's an example where I believe that the Internet of Things can help. And if we think of the Internet of Things, it's not really new. At least in my opinion, we've had data for a long time. Data's existed in our systems. It's just, do we mine it correctly? Do we get it in real time? Because if we get it in real time, it's a benefit. If we don't, then it's after the fact data. And if we get it in real time, is it in some type of format that we can actually act upon in real time to make it beneficial? And here's why I think that if we think of a connected environment where it could be a benefit, and I'll give you a cold chain example. So years ago when I was in distribution, and we would have deliveries of chilled product that were coming across the country, for instance, from West Coast to East Coast. And maybe it was a 4-day trip. When that product would arrive at the dock, we would open the door and we would take a temperature reading of the product in the trailer. And if it said that it was within the parameters we had set, that's okay, great. So we would mark that down and we'd unload the product and ship it to the stores and so on. But what we really had was a snapshot in time. What we didn't know was that possibly 2 days earlier, halfway across the country, when the driver stopped for dinner, the reefer ran out of fuel. And he didn't notice it right away, and then before he got to the warehouse, he stopped, he reloaded the reefer fuel and cooled it down again, and so on. So, that wasn't visible to anyone. So we've got solutions in place now. There's solutions out there that will track what's actually happening en route from a load like that currently. Now what it does though is it keeps, using sensors and RFID and things like that, it keeps track of that. The problem is once that arrives, I lift the door again and I take the readings of those systems, or I take that yellow or blue box, whatever it may be, off, and I read it. And I now see that, okay, 2 days earlier something happened to it. So now I can react. I can call the buying merchandising group and I can tell them that, hey, we've had a possible problem with this. We have maybe shortened shelf life. Do you want to check it out? Do you want to make a replacement order? So I actually can see that happened, but it's still a snapshot in time at the end. If you use the connected environment the right way, and that's what I'm going to call it instead of the Internet of Things, and if we do it in real time, and I have sensors and so things like that involved, those types of technologies, and I'm pushing that information out to a cloud that someone can to, okay? It's just a conduit of information that suppliers and the retailers and whomever can subscribe to. I would know immediately when that happened. I would sense that temperature went out of its range, and I would publish that information to that cloud-based system that whoever is subscribing to that would see. Now it's real-time information I can act upon. I can place a replacement order immediately so that I'm farther ahead of the game. I can look to start sourcing something maybe locally, and then when that arrives I can react to what's actually happened with it as well. But I actually now have that information when it's happening. So there's a lot of benefit from having a connected environment and being able to publish information that people can subscribe to in the manner they want, or look for the typical, or they can look for events or even non-events, right, to be able to alert them to activity or actionable insights that can spur some proactive activity on their part. So right now I want to talk a little bit about the technology, but what I don't want to talk about is the technical aspects of the technology, or the speeds and feeds. All these technologies fit within the parameters they're supposed to. What I'd really like to talk about when I speak of these technologies is a different way of utilizing them in the workflow process. So I want to look at it from a workflow process standpoint versus a device standpoint, so to speak. So, and looking at ways to use the types of technologies, the data collection technologies, in a way that can improve operations. So, certainly if we think of receiving or cross-dock, everybody knows that paper is, the least efficient and causes, a lot of problems and so forth from an accuracy and productivity standpoint. And everyone knows that, using mobile computing and printing is a much more efficient way. But if we look at improving that workflow with mobile computing and mobile printing, so taking actually the process to the product, right? Instead of having fixed printers in an office or every so many doors on a dock, using this in a mobile fashion, especially at e-commerce. We talked about the increased velocities through the DC, which means I'm receiving more product in a shorter period of time, or just trying to receive more in the same amount of time than I ever have before, which means I got to turn my dock quicker. I got to turn my dock so I can turn my doors and get the amount of product in that I need to fulfill for the selection end. One of the ways to do that is to do it in a mobile fashion. If I'm out there and I've received that pallet of goods, or whatever it may be, the several cases, and I can print that label on demand, apply it, and move to the next pallet, that pallet is now eligible to be put away by a forklift. So I'm turning my dock quicker, all right? And my dock to stock cycle time, which is defined as the time the trailer backs in until it's unloaded, the product's put away, and it's in a status that I can bill against it and fulfill with it. That's dock to stock cycle time. I can do this in a mobile fashion and reduce that. And I can take, what is some of the if you look at WERC, the Warehouse Education Research Council numbers, some of the worst dock to stock cycle times reported in their survey are, around 8 hours, upwards of more than 4 to 8. Some of the best are under 2. So being able to move this product quicker off the dock is imperative so that receiving does not become a bottleneck in my operation. In connection with receiving, certainly we spoke briefly about the put away, process, but there's also replenishment that goes on, and stocking, into case flow rack if I'm picking eaches and so on. One of the ways to keep forklifts moving and loaded, forklifts, if they're not moving and if there's not product on them, are a very inefficient use of both equipment and people. So we want to keep them moving. We don't want a lot of off the truck activity. When I'm getting off the truck to do things, I'm really not utilizing it. And to be able to have the right type of systems in place, which, my vehicle mount computers, whether that's a full screen vehicle mount or whether I'm using a handheld in a docking station, and have the capability of either having that handheld with near-far imaging, something that can scan both items or pallets within a close range, as well as scan location identifications, at a farther distance, whether that be through the mobile computers or a vehicle mount paired with the right scanner that can do that, it is important. I want to keep the trucks moving. When they're moving, and I'm being able to use interleaving, which is a process, as most of you know, that if you've been in the distribution and fulfillment world, of utilizing that truck better and that personnel better by not bringing it back to the dock with empty forks to get the next put away pallet, but on the way back making a replenishment along the way within the right priority and proximity. And being able to attach purpose-built printers to that, so that if I have to make inventory moves, or I need pallet ID labels or full pallet pick labels, anything that I can do to look at that as a system to keep the fork moving and the person on the fork is certainly an enhancement. When we think of picking, picking is always forefront in a DC, because roughly 55 to 60, or sometimes in a direct-to-consumer facility can be even higher than 60% of the workforce is in the picking application. It's in the picking workflow. So since I have a very high amount of my labor force dedicated to picking, and that is where most of the errors take place from a accuracy standpoint in the DC, as well as a lot of times my lowest productivity. It's typically the people with less seniority. So picking becomes a focus. It becomes a very big focus in the DC, and it's usually when you walk into a distribution center, you certainly want to look at improving all your workflow processes. Sometimes the best place to start is picking, because it's the largest ROI from a people and an efficiency standpoint. What we're seeing is that people are looking, especially in direct-to-consumer. It's not such a big thing in pallet picking. You know, I'm picking a whole pallet, I'm moving it to the dock. You know, I can certainly accomplish that with, you know, vehicle mounts and scanners. Case picking, though, where I'm actually handling cases, it can be heavier cases, can be bulky, and especially eaches, where utilizing both hands to pick at higher rates can be helpful. We're seeing a big push to hands-free type environments. That can include voice, and it can also include wearables. So a lot of our customers are asking us to continue to develop along those lines, certainly because of the accuracies it drives, you know, with 99.99% plus, you know, as well as productivity gains up to 50%, you know, and especially if you're coming from paper to one of those technologies. And we talked a lot so far about, you know, about productivity, but is accuracy important? You know, so, you know, typically if I'm performing this in a room full of people, I'll ask them to raise their hand and ask how many are, you know, at 98% or 99%, and whether they think that's good. And a lot of times a lot of hands raise. But I even go one step further and ask, is 99.9% good enough, you know, in picking from an accuracy standpoint? And really, it's not. You know, if you look at the examples I have listed here with, you know, the number of babies being sent home wrong and RXs filled wrong, you know, the one most relevant to this audience without those shock factors are really the picking units, right? And if I'm only picking 12 million units annually, and that's not a lot, you know, there's customers out there picking hundreds of millions a year, you know. That means at 99.9, I'm still picking 12,000 annually wrong, or 1,000 a month. And with the ABC costing method that a lot of our customers have done, with the administration cost, the return, the actual re-effort or rework of going out and picking the right item, it's in a little bit upwards of $50 per mispick. So if you look at that, you know, DCs on average are losing greater than $400,000 a year in the picking workflow. So this is why, you know, again, it's a reminder to focus especially on the picking workflow, but not just from a productivity standpoint, but what technologies can I use to drive the accuracies I need as well. Cycle counting. You know, one of the most expensive and really, I think, most inefficient processes in a distribution center is a full physical inventory. A lot of times you're taking folks that aren't really familiar with the product that you're bringing in, you know, whether they be, you know, front office, whatever it may be, and putting them out there to count. And a lot of times after a full physical, you end up, you know, correcting some, but, you know, driving inefficiency or incorrect counts in product locations that were already correct. So it's costly. You're shutting down the operation. So cycle counting is the way to go, and there's ways to do that, you know, to interleave those processes with other workflows to make it more efficient. But the least efficient way to cycle count is on paper. And I still see a lot of people doing this. You know, they're trying to do cycle counting to eliminate physicals, but they're out there with these locations on paper. So first off, they have to write it down. Secondly, they have to write it in the right spot on the paper instead of another line, you know, for some other product. and then they have to come back in and do the data entry and make sure that's correct, or if they hand it off to someone. So there's a lot of points of error introduced here versus actually using handhelds, or if you're picking with voice, you can interleave that process. You can even interleave it with the handhelds. As I'm picking, if my slot location after I make the pick drops below 5, it's very easy and it doesn't disrupt my selection workflow if I just very briefly ask that person to count what's there. It dropped below 5, count. Is there 3? Yes. Okay, move on. I've now done a cycle count, especially with my fastest moving items, which there's more error in the fastest moving items because they're handled more often, and in my high value items where it matters. So I would very strongly suggest, if you're doing cycle counts, if you aren't doing them, to do them, and if you are doing them, to do them with technology versus paper. Packing is an area where it can also be a bottleneck. So we talked about receiving possibly being a bottleneck in the e-commerce. Packing is another area. I could do all the picking I need, but if I can't get it packed and ready for shipment, then I'm impacting the delivery process, which we talked about earlier isn't good, and I'm backing up picking because I can't only bring so much stuff to the packing stations, especially if I'm doing e-commerce. During this time of year, a lot of people that are in e-commerce add up to 30 to 50% more packing stations at this time of year than they normally have during the year. Packing stations can be very expensive. They can have monitors, keyboards, printing, and all the other things attached to them, or they can be somewhat seamless if you use the right technologies. So using a smart printer that has the capability to host the manifesting and shipping software right on the printer eliminates the need for the keyboard and the monitor. It can actually drive the shipping system process right off the printer. And then using a scanner with, in an overhead stand, the items under and use both hands that way, either with a scanner like that or, using voice with a scanner. We've seen that deployed as well, combining those two technologies so that I hear the instructions. I take the items and I can use both hands, take 2 items at once, run them under the scanner and put them in the right outbound container, pack it and ship it. And the thing about that in that manner is that I can deploy these very quickly. All I need is power for the printer. So it's a very quick way to get packing stations up and running, to add additional packing stations so that I'm removing that bottleneck in my operation. And shipping and loading certainly is we recommend using scan at the shipping and loading process. I can't tell you the amount of times that we get all the items picked and staged, but in a very busy, very fast-paced moving dock, a lot of times things can't be staged directly in front of the door to avoid the costly extra transportation trips that result in leaving pallets behind or loading pallets on the wrong trailers. We certainly recommend using scanning technology to scan the pallet that's to be loaded and then scan either the door and or trailer that it's being loaded into to ensure that it's going in the right trailer. That also gives us instant visibility on that mobile computer to let us know that all pallets have either been loaded or items or have not, and allows us to then to correct that and make sure that things are loaded before that route goes out so that it doesn't result in additional routes. And sensors. Using sensors with RFID, it's one of the things about Honeywell is that we have so many different internal technologies available to us that it's allowing us to look at ways to combine these technologies in a manner and to innovate in a manner that we can take advantage of our own innovation and try to produce solutions that would help our customers, whether across multiple industries. So utilizing small sensors that would detect the movement of RFID labeled stock in a store, for instance, allows me to track my inventory better. It allows me to locate inventory. If somebody, took jeans out of a cubbyhole and, walked with them and then they decide they didn't want them and they put them somewhere else in the store, I would be able to track that. I would be able to do inventories in an automated fashion, freeing up store personnel to not have to hold pen and paper and take inventories, but to actually wait on customers and try to increase my revenues and my sales and in the basket size within the store. So we're looking at ways to automate those processes in the store as well. The other thing we're doing is we're expanding current technologies outside of where they grew up in their comfort level. So if you think of voice, it grew up in picking. We've already moved voice outside of picking in the DC to include cycle counting, stocking, fork work, and so on. But we're also looking on how to utilize voice outside the DC. So we're looking at it in maintenance and inspection, where we have voice-driven, hands-free type of maintenance and inspection processes. We've also got it for pickup and delivery to be able to allow courier people to use both hands and locate items on a truck, but we're also doing it in store to be able to do stocking of shelves, picking of product in the store, and so on. So we're looking just, the point of this message here is to say that we're really trying to expand those technologies that have been very, very successful in one area of your business to other areas as well. And we're looking to do that across the board. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but we're looking at making it a complete connected environment of taking information from people, from mobile computing or devices, utilizing indoor locationing, tying it all back into your warehouse management or execution systems, and really getting to provide the leaders of these organizations with the type of dashboarding information they need to know what's going on in their facility from a productivity and a safety and a people standpoint, a people well-being standpoint. So which workflow, we've talked about a lot of workflows, and which ones matter most? And we talked about WERC and Research Council. As you can see over the last 3 years, and 2016's is out now as well, and it's not going to be any different, is the order may change a little, but the top 5 are all focused around customer satisfaction. So the executives that they're interviewing are telling us, the rest of the industry, that customer satisfaction metrics are the most important to them. And they're also looking at if you think of all the metrics that people track within the DC, when I was running distribution centers, the one metric I tracked the most was cost per unit shipped. Everything was important, but that was the most important. If I could keep that in line and I could continually lower that, I knew that I was being efficient. And that doesn't have to be lowered by dollars at a time. If I have the right amount of volumes, even lowering my cost per unit shipped by pennies can have significant impact on my financial success of my organization. So as end users, you need to look at that line, that row right there, and see where you're at on that row and try to find ways to move yourself from left to right on there, utilizing some of the technologies and the process improvement aspects we talked about today. And that's how you build your case for mobility solutions. There's certainly things that, like dock-to-stock cycle time, pick accuracies, productivity, on-time shipments that we talked about that are hard cost savings that can be used to drive your ROI and build the case for investing in mobility solutions. But there's also other things that are more soft costs that are very important that technology and process improvement can help with. We talked about well-being. They're more ergonomic, they introduce safer practices, and they provide higher morale. 43% of the DC execs we talked to said that turnover was a problem and that morale was the biggest cause of the turnover. And that kind of ties in with training time as well. If you think of the DCs now, I have not been in a distribution center in the last 5 to 10 years that's not multilingual, and that's around the world. I do this globally, and I can't find one that speaks all one language. So anything on paper is going to be a disadvantage for a significant percentage of the workforce. And if I want to increase those or decrease the training times and get people up to speed faster, more productive, and more accurate quicker, then paper's the wrong way to do that. So being able to introduce mobility and allow people to scan and to do those types of activities or hear things in their native language is certainly going to make for a safer, more well-rounded employee and allow that person to be more efficient. So when you're thinking of building your case for mobility, look at your hard cost items, but also look at the soft cost items as well, because a lot of times those can help be the tipping point in your decision.
Excellent, Bruce. Thank you ever so much for that. I'm sure everybody will agree that that was some incredibly good information. And if you've got any questions or you want to talk to anybody about some of the solutions that we discussed here in this presentation, please feel free to call us. We have a telephone number up on the screen, or you can email sales@redlinesolutions.com. Our main website is redlinesolutions.com. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter @redlinesols, and you'll see our Twitter handle up there. So thank you ever so much for dialing in, and have a great day. Bye.